Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Hardware Podcast. My name's Jackson Danner alongside my good friend Omar Borja. Today we're previewing week 13 as we are wrapping up the regular season at the FBS level at least. But Omar, how you doing today?
Good. It's nice and early. Great way to start off the day with some college football. I mean, what better way to do it than starting off recording hardware podcasts?
It is
It is
very early locally, Mountain Time. What is it, like 4 in the morning for you? Um,
4:08 right now.
4:08 and I'm recording at 6:08 on the East Coast. So yeah, very early day. But it's guaranteed to be a good day because we're gonna get at least it's somewhat filled with some college football. So only two games tonight, I believe. If you're listening to this on Thursday night, it's a little bit of a weak Thursday night slate. One FBS game and one FCS game, if I remember correctly. So anyways, we're going to be previewing some Saturday games. But first, as we are an awards-driven podcast, I do want to talk a little bit about the Heisman as we do every single week. Travis Hunter is now pretty much that firm front runner. Ashton Genty, I think you would still put in two, but they've flip-flopped spots from what they've been most of the year. The reverse against Utah, and what was a pretty dominating win against uh, a, a team, an uncharacteristically, not going to call them like soft or anything, but it's an uncharacteristic Utah team, right? You're used to seeing Kyle Whittingham teams be really tough. You do not want to play Utah, and it just hasn't been the same since they've joined the Big 12 this year. Do you think that's a Heisman moment? Do you think like it's something else? Where do you think he stands in the Heisman race as far as solidifying his front runner spot?
So I definitely think the narrative is shifting, right? Definitely think it's shifting towards Hunter's favor. And whether that's the media's fault or that's they're doing it on purpose, I definitely see it. And I think the reverse contributed because seeing like all the highlights, because let's see, what game was I watching at noon last week? Definitely not that game. I definitely wasn't watching Colorado versus Utah. But on all the halftime shows, like in the 3:30 slot, you would see that reverse. And they were up 42-21 with 3 minutes left. So it's not like it was a game-winning play. He just reversed field and scored a 7-yard touchdown. And it was an obvious stat pad. Very obvious stat pattern. That's nothing against Travis Hunter. He is a great guy. Outstanding man. So I'm not holding that against him, but it's like the reverse was an obvious stat pad, and people were saying it was cool. He reversed field. It was a trick play, and whether it's a Heisman moment, I don't think so, but I think people are treating it that way because they just want Travis Hunter to desperately win the Heisman over Ashton Genty, which in my book, Ashton Genty is still the best player in the country, and I think the advanced stats show that where it's like quite literally you have to play with no safeties and just two cornerbacks, like load the box with nine players to straight up stop this man. And I think that just shows the most dominant player in the country stats like that. So nothing against Hunter. I think it's interesting because both players will have concurrent games on Black Friday on network TV. Colorado State plays Oklahoma, or Colorado plays Oklahoma State on Black Friday at noon on ABC. At the same time, Oregon State travels to Boise State at noon on Fox. So it's like Black Friday is going to be a huge day for the Heisman race. This is probably like the biggest Black Friday for the Heisman race we've seen in years. So it's interesting. I think it's neck and neck, but this is probably, I mean, I'm just so refreshed by this Heisman race that this is not the same best quarterback, the best team. Like Dylan Gabriel's done great this year, but his stats have just not been at like super impressive, really. Like Oregon's just been dominant the whole year. And so, sorry. So it's just like it's just not the best quarterback. It's not who's the best quarterback on the bestest team race. So that's refreshing. But yeah, the reverse, cool play. And it's being considered a Heisman moment, but I don't think it should be, honestly.
I agree. It shouldn't be, but that's going to be something that's going to be shown if he does win it and Chris Fowler's announcing it in New York City. It's definitely going to be like one of the first plays shown, right? So, no, I would agree. So,
Yeah, and like the thing is too, is like the narrative between like two-way players is interesting because it just seems like we think that Travis Hunter is the first two-way player to like play. since Gordy Lock bombed the Holy Cross in the 1980s. We forget about Jabril Peppers, right? I mean, Jabril Peppers wasn't a full two-way player, but he ran Wildcat, he ran running back, played wide receiver. I mean, did all that stuff. And there's been a number of different players over the years, like different linebackers that I can think of that have taken stats at, or snaps at quarterback as like a Wildcat quarterback, like Joel Lanning from Iowa State in 2017 comes to mind. Jack Costello, a former preseason 49ers fullback for Oregon State just a couple years ago. So it's like I know Travis Hunter's playing every single snap, every single meaningful snap, but it's like I mean, it's not as unprecedented as we think. Champ Bailey is another one too. Like Champ Bailey had 700 receiving yards, like in like I think it was 97. I think it was in Woodson's Heisman year too, exactly. So
To play devil's advocate, I do think that what is very impressive about Travis specifically is just his snap count. I don't know what the snap count or what the percentage of time played was for all the players that you're talking about. But I think it's just so it has to be like close to unprecedented to play like almost genuinely 100% of snaps on both sides of the ball. You barely see guys play 100% on their side of the ball, right? Or upwards of 90%. And the fact that he's playing such a heavy snap count for either position, like if you took him as just a corner, just a receiver, he's playing high percentages for those positions, but then you double it, right? I think that's what's really impressive. Not to take away anything from any previous two-way players, and it's definitely not. I mean, college football has been around for what, like 154 years now. There's not much we haven't seen, but it's but the fact that Travis Hunter is just playing so much, I think is what's impressive more than
yeah,
that he's just playing both generically.
yeah, I agree. Like the snap counts are impressive, right? I'm not taking that away. The snap counts are amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I can't imagine doing that. I mean, when I was playing ball in high school, like playing both ways, every meaningful snap. But I think that's when it comes down to is the Heisman Trophy the Horning Award or is it the Heisman Trophy? Is it the player who does the most or who is the best player in the country, right? And Travis Hunter's
Good
amazing.
point.
He's been
Yeah.
amazing in coverage. But I just think Genty is the best player in the country just based on how much teams have to do to stop him. So it's interesting though. This is just the best Heisman race I've seen in years. I want to say like
It is.
anytime there's like a running back in the race, like and another position player where it's not a running back versus a quarterback, but it's like a running back versus another running back, or a running back versus a receiver, or a running back versus a defensive tackle, like 2009 with the Ndamukong Suh. It's an amazing race.
Yeah, it is a fantastic race. We'll go ahead and move on to our players of the week from week 12. I'll start off with my offensive player of the week, Emmett Mosley, the wide receiver from Stanford. He had 13 receptions, 168 yards, and three touchdowns in a huge upset win over Louisville. Now, you could argue that Louisville may have lost that game more than Stanford won it, but Stanford wouldn't have been in a position to steal a win if it weren't for Emmett. He was a class of 2022 recruit who really hasn't seen much playing time yet at Louisville. He hadn't had more than 48 yards in a single game until Saturday. Hopefully, they're going to find a little bit more of a consistent place for him in these last couple weeks of the season leading into next year. Just a fun fact, his mom played soccer at Notre Dame in the 90s. She actually won the Herman Trophy, which is the Heisman equivalent for women's soccer. So there's definitely high-end athleticism in the family. Hopefully, Emmett Mosley, as if you're a 3-7 Stanford team, you're kind of looking into the 2025 season. Hopefully, he finds something that's a little bit more consistent usage.
I mean, hopefully that win builds momentum for Stanford this year, or for next year. I mean, definitely a surprising win. And yeah, like you said, that was probably one of the craziest finishes I've seen in some time. Definitely the craziest like last second field goal drive. But man, Stanford producing good receivers that like, I guess have good pro resumes lately, or I guess in the last decade. Definitely a trend we've seen. I mean, JJ Arcega-Whiteside comes to mind and everything. And then, I mean, he hasn't had a great career in the NFL, but definitely like a great athlete out of college. So it's interesting for sure. Hopefully Stanford can figure it out. because I think college football is better when the good academic schools are having, or great academic schools are having very solid years. So for my first player of the week for on offense, I'm going with Eptom Chisholm the third for Eastern Washington. And tell me if you heard this before, a receiver with over 100 catches for Eastern Washington, a slot receiver. I mean, this is Cooper Cup, essentially Cooper Cup. Like he had 12 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown in Eastern Washington's 77-42 win over Idaho State. He has 107 catches this year. He is a senior. I don't know how the Hula Bowl has not invited this man yet, considering Eastern Washington is not really in the playoff race. I would say the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl, but that does not exist anymore, sadly. But definitely the Hula Bowl, and I think he's definitely Shrine Bowl material. But I think the thing is with the Shrine Bowl is it's shifting more towards a Senior Bowl 2.0 as Shador Sanders and Jimmy Horn Jr. both accepted bids yesterday. So those guys are definitely mobile material for sure. So I think it's shifting to, I guess, away from guys like Epton Chisholm the third. But man, 12 catches, 157 yards, 107 catches this year. I really think this year is the year of the wide receiver in the FCS. You have Chisholm, you have Giovanni Gibson from Arkansas Pine Bluff having amazing years. I mean, it's just a really great year to be a receiver in the Ivy League, and even or I mean in the FCS, and even the Ivy League has a couple of guys that were showcased in the Cornell Penn game last week. So, Aptim Chisholm the third. Hopefully, you'll see him in either the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, or at the very least the Hula Bowl. But just having an amazing year, and this guy's Cooper Cup 2.0. Like, honestly,
One of the postseason All-Star games, right? Just one of them you can make it into. Um, for my defensive player of the week from week 12, I'm going to go with TJ Parker, the edge rusher from Clemson. He played 71 snaps, 22 more than any other game he had this season. He did not get close to winded. He had 8 pressures, including 4 sacks, which ties the school record for Clemson, and another 2 quarterback hits. He had another 3 tackles and 6 run stops, as well as a forced fumble in this game. Overall, he had a 23% pass rush win rate, which is just an obscenely high amount. Now, this was against a player playing right tackle who he only had the right tackle he was going against only had 28 snaps of college football under his belt before making a start against Clemson, because the starting right tackle had to move over to left tackle, I believe, because of injury. But that's not to take anything away from TJ. TJ also had another multi-sack game earlier this year against NC State, but no other performance this year had come close. Just absolutely a dominant victory. And that game was closer than it probably should have been if Clemson actually is an elite team or a very good team. So the fact that they only won by 4 and kind of stole a last minute touchdown, I'm not gonna, I can't say they stole it because they got it fair and square, but like, come on, Pitt. Like, you can't stomp a 50-yard quarterback run for a touchdown. The fact that it was that close shows that this game probably wouldn't have been won if it weren't for TJ Parker. And I love it when we can say that about a football game, that it wouldn't have been won if it weren't for X player on the defensive line.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. Like that's again another game that I did not focus on since I was focusing on the Patriot League race at noon. And I thought that Pitt had that one pulled off, seeing the in-game update with the late field goal, but man, Cade Klubnik, like yeah, what a run, honestly. Like I didn't know he had that in him. I didn't know he
I
had
didn't
that
either.
that comeback
It was
leadership, that
very
comeback
Trevor
drive in him.
Lawrence-esque of him. You remember when Trevor would do those long runs, and it's like, where did that come from? Pitt, the defining moment of the game, Omar, if you did not watch it, was a drive. I think it was like first or second and goal from like the 2 yard line for Pitt, and they had a false start that like they got away with it. It was missed, and they ran the play, and all was well. And then didn't get anything out of it. And then the next time they had a false start, and then it was a delay of game, and then another like illegal motion or illegal substitution, and then like another false start. It was like 4 back to back to back to back penalties that made him like it pushed him back like almost outside of the red zone on like second and goal. It was like you can't win a football game against a top team like Clemson if you're going to just like defeat yourself that way, you know? And it was like it was at home. It wasn't even like the crowd was an issue or anything. Not that that would be excusable, even if it was a tough road game. But again, maybe not unlike the Louisville Stanford game. Pitt lost that game more than Clemson won, but Cade Klubnik and TJ Parker both certainly made significant contributions to stealing a win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the ACC, I mean, Pitt has just played itself out of the ACC race, honestly, almost to a
They
point where
have.
they are forgotten. Their great start of the year is forgotten. Really a crazy development through the year. But yeah, I guess going with my defensive player of the week, I'm going with a military player from Military Academy. I'm going with Solomon Ashby III from the Coast Guard Academy, who had 10 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and a 42-21 win in the Secretary's Cup against Merchant Marine. Ashby's a senior. Probably pro football is not in his prospects. Probably not due to talent, not for anything talent wise, but just due to him being in the Coast Guard Academy. But man, Ashby having a great game to end his college career against their arch rivals, the Merchant Marine Academy. And the great news about that rivalry is next year that rivalry is headed to Fenway, the first neutral site in the history of the lesser known military academy classic in college football, the Secretary's Cup, which I think everyone should go to at least one Secretary's Cup in their lifetime. If you love Army Navy, you'll love Coast Guard Merchant Marine. But Solomon Ashby III, 10 tackles from the defensive line position. And given his build, he looks like he's probably a defensive end, not even an outside linebacker at 275 pounds. But to get 10 tackles, the 2.5 sacks are impressive, but 10 tackles from that position, doubly impressive.
Absolutely. Anytime you put up double digit tackles, it's an impressive feat. Was that total or was that solo? I'm
No,
just
it was
curious.
total
It was
tackles. It
total.
was
Okay,
total.
still
Yeah.
extremely impressive. But I know sometimes on the show we've made that distinction, so I just wanted to make sure. For my HBCU player of the week from last week, I'm going to go with Nathan Rembert, the wide receiver from Mississippi Valley State. It has been a rough year for Mississippi Valley State. Obviously, this was the highlight, but I'll get to that in just a minute. Nathan has been one of the only bright spots on this team, though. He has 600 more receiving yards than anyone else on the team. Saturday, it was a huge win versus Florida A&M. He had 7 receptions for 130 yards and a touchdown. It was his fourth game with north of 100 yards this year, which is a feat considering they're only averaging 185 passing yards a game. So he's gotten a heavy percentage of that. This was Mississippi Valley State's first road win since November 2021, and it was against a team who had a 23 home game winning streak, which is just an insane stat. MVSU was allowing 41 points per game this year. They held FAMU to 21 despite being outgained by 90 yards. Nathan is a transfer from Edward Waters, which is an HBCU based in Jacksonville that's actually wrapping up its transition to go from D3 to D2. So hopefully he doesn't forget where he came from there. But Nathan Rembert, man, just a fantastic game and a season that no one's really talking about because there's been no reason to talk about MVSU football until now. So
Yeah, I mean, MVSU definitely, they have the toughest lot of any FCS school, I think, with the budgetary constraints that they have, their location in rural Mississippi out there in Itabena. But man, like that game on Saturday was a feel-good story. I know I clicked it the moment I saw that MVSU was up at halftime on Florida A&M. Like I knew that I had to watch it. But it's just an amazing story. And Rembert had good games against Prairie View. I remember I gave him I guess one of my player of the week's nods and when they nearly beat Prairie View. They came just a point away from beating the Panthers. But this game, just amazing upset. And like you just gotta root for Mississippi Valley State in this age of college football with NIL, with everything about booster funding. I mean, you just hope for the best for programs like that, and wins like that just show, that college football is still alive and well. The college football we love is alive and well. So going with my player of the week, Not a senior. This is the first time in a while I haven't had a senior, but I've had to showcase him. Jamari Taylor had 24 carry of North Carolina Central had 24 carries for 206 yards and 3 touchdowns. This put him over 1,000 yards on the year. He now has 14 touchdowns in 10 games. And as for North Carolina Central, I don't know if they'll make the FCS playoffs. They have a good resume. They're 7-3. They are 7-2 against FCS competition. So they'll have to win this week to hopefully get themselves into the playoffs. But man, Jamari Taylor, and I hope this doesn't happen for Taylor, but he reminded like his path, I guess, or his kind of rise reminds me of Baishul Tootin from their cross-state rival, North Carolina A&T. And we all know that Tootin's had an amazing year for Virginia Tech. I mean, if Ashton Genty weren't having such an amazing year, we'd be talking about Baishul Tootin a lot more for sure. I mean, Tootin came from North Carolina A&T, had great years there, and ended up transferring at the FBS level. Now, I hope this doesn't happen for Taylor. I hope Taylor stays, but I definitely can see him getting a lot of attention in the transfer portal. But man, like when we talk about North Carolina Central, we talk about quarterback play with like Walker Harris, but it was just a hard fought game. Like the defense shined, and then so did Jamari Taylor, so did the run game. It was like a tough November MEAC football game that the conference is known for. So Jamari Taylor, maybe next year you'll see him in a Power Four roster. I hope not. I hope he stays in North Carolina Central. But man, 206 yards, 3 touchdowns, can't beat it on national TV too, on ESPN, on ESPNU.
ESPNU specifically has been carrying some very good FCS games lately. Props to Disney and ESPN for making sure that that slate or that those and it's not always like the late night like 10 p.m. like MVFC games, right? Like there actually have been like some decent games, some decent FCS games on for like 3:30 kicks and all that, if I remember correctly. So we'll move on to the portion of the show previewing week 13. I'll start off with my first game, UConn at Syracuse. As someone that lives just a few miles away from the New York Connecticut border, I can tell you that there couldn't be less excitement locally for this game, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that this isn't a big one. UConn has its first 7-win season since they were a member of the Big East in 2010. That was 7 head coaches ago for any UConn fans that are counting. Now, UConn doesn't have a top 75 running back in total rushing yards, but they're one of 22 teams at the FBS level that average 200 yards a game or more because they've got a nice little three running back system between Duell Robinson, Kim Edwards, and Mel Brown. In the passing game, it'll be interesting to see who starts. Nick Evers has been the starter for most of the year, but Joe Fagnano he's also played. Fagnano has 69 less attempts than Evers throughout the year, but a nice 8 more touchdowns than Evers in the attempts he has had. So it's my understanding from briefly browsing UConn Twitter that the people want Fagnano. So maybe he'll get the start. We'll see. For Syracuse, I can't quite figure it out. Can't quite figure them out. They've beaten ranked UNLV on the road, but they've also lost 500 Boston College and 3-1 Stanford. And then they just got absolutely embarrassed at Pitt in prime time, if you remember that. So if you don't win this, they're quickly looking at a 7-5 season as they only have Miami left on the schedule after this game, which is very disappointing after acquiring Kyle McCord and starting out the season 5-1 with so much hope. So it's going to be a significant win for both programs. Either UConn's going to have an 8-win season and God knows how long, or Syracuse can maybe look to salvage their season. If you're a Syracuse fan, you can live with 8-4, right? If you drop to Miami next week, 8-4 bowl game. Look forward to next year, right? So I think it would be more of an impactful win for both schools than it would be an impactful loss.
Yeah, so for Syracuse, it would definitely keep them, I think, out of the bottom tier of ACC bowls. A win against UConn, keep them out of the military, the Fenway Bowl, playing against an American Athletic Conference team, and risking getting embarrassed last year by an American Athletic Conference team. Like last year, if you remember the Boca Raton Bowl, how much of a bloodbath that one was. They didn't have a quarterback for crying out loud in that game. but it's definitely great to see Syracuse and UConn play in relevant football again. Like it's the early 2010s, man. Feels like I'm a child again watching the Big East. Watching these two face off. But UConn, I think they need every win possible to make them more attractive to bowl scouts because man, they don't have a bowl time. And doing my
They
calculations and
are
projection.
independent for any listeners
Yeah.
that might have forgotten.
Yeah, like they're independent, and I mean, they don't have a goal time. And doing my projections, like it's getting pretty close to us having like either one too many bowl teams or just enough bowl teams. But they need some teams to lose, and they also need a win out to like make themselves really attractive to fill some unopened bowl slots. So definitely a huge game out there in the Northeast, and a huge game for the Lambert Trophy race too, for sure. Going to my first game of the week, I'm gonna go with Thanksgiving Day. I mean, of course, starting off the week, or sorry, Thanksgiving Day. I'm skipping the holidays a bit soon. I'm gonna go with Army Notre Dame. It's early. Sorry about that. So it's early, but Army Notre Dame, of course. And man, if you think I was gonna showcase any other game, I mean, what are you doing? I mean, being a lifelong Army fan, this is probably the biggest non-Army Navy game that we've played ever. First time that Army's ranked heading into an Army Notre Dame game since 1985, and just the second time Army's been ranked heading into Army Notre Dame since 1958. Games at Yankee Stadium, honoring the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. The 1924 game, Grantland Rice penned those famous words, that famous poem, in 1924. So just so much history, the history and life and lore of college football in full display. And furthermore, we're talking about Travis Hunter and Ashton Genty. Bryson Daly can insert himself into the Heisman race with a win over Notre Dame. I honestly think that with the amount of rushing touchdowns he's had, with how well he's been throwing the ball in the option scheme, Notre Dame can provide his Heisman moment for sure. And I think he can definitely find himself in New York instead of Dylan Gabriel, honestly, because I want to say that I don't know how many rushing touchdowns Dylan Gabriel has, but Bryson Daly is probably just a few behind Dylan Gabriel. I know Dylan Gabriel's had 22 passing touchdowns, but I don't know if Dylan Gabriel has more than 30 touchdowns total on the year. So like Bryson Daly, I want to say his last count for rushing touchdowns is 21, I believe he's at right now. And then, of course, throwing the ball, I think he's got 8 touchdowns. So I think he's close to Gabriel in terms of total touchdowns. So a few touchdowns against Notre Dame could go a long way in his Heisman race. But man, this one also is a playoff elimination game. Notre Dame loses, they are definitely out of the playoff. My Army loses, it looks like they are for sure out of the playoff unless they can get Colorado State to win out, including the Mountain West title game. But man, Army Notre Dame, the stakes have not been this high since 1958.
Absolutely. You are both an West Point grad and I believe, a Notre Dame season ticket holder, right? So maybe some split alliances, not really. But but yes, I know. This is the kind of football that you live for. So. For my next game of the week, I'm going to go with Colorado State at Fresno State. Omar, this is something that shocked me. Colorado State is one of 8 teams to be undefeated in conference play at the FBS level, so which I was not aware of. As it stands now, it would be a Boise State, Colorado State Mountain West title game, which just imagine the chaos that would ensue if they did manage to squeak a win out against Boise State. But anyways, they've outscored their opponents this year by 9 points, not 9 points per game, 9 points total, but they've still managed to be 7-3 on the year. The key to this game, though, for them is going to be red zone efficiency. They're 105th in the country in red zone offense. They've only scored on 78% of red zone trips, not scoring touchdowns, just scoring total on 78% of red zone trips. You can't play at Fresno State or expect to compete against Boise State if you're not playing efficient red zone football. Fresno State, remember, is a team that beat like a pretty decent San Jose State team at home by like 23 points. So excited to see this one. Obviously has big implications in the Mountain West race, and see if Colorado State can manage to get a win on the road.
I mean, that's good timing. I mean, I guess we worked this out, being partners so long and just having that chemistry. But like I mentioned Colorado State, you mentioned it with your next game. But yeah, like It's crazy how much Washington State and Oregon State impacted the Mountain West race because the Mountain West is only playing 7 conference games. And of course, the eighth conference game that they normally play, Colorado State could have played either Boise State or UNLV, but they play neither. And so that's a crazy thing. So I mean, a lot of people were saying, I myself too was like, you know what? I can't wait for the Boise State UNLV rematch, but it might never come because of this, which is a crazy situation. And I mean, like looking like when you take a look at Colorado State stats, like last year Braden Fowler Nicolosi and Torrey Horton had both amazing years. Fowler Nicolosi was throwing it around the yard, but Fowler Nicolosi has not had a bad year. He's only got 8 touchdowns, but he's averaging less than 200 yards per game throwing the ball. It's the run game. They have a two-headed running back monster of Avery Morrow, and got to get the other guy's name. Um, I just looked at it, but Avery Morrow and phone froze, of course, at the right time. But they have a two-headed running back duo. Morrow has over 800 yards. So he'll probably get to 1,000 this year. Their freshman running back has 570, I want to say, and close to probably will get to about 700 on the year. But Colorado State's doing it in ways that you wouldn't think Colorado State would, really. And their other running back is Justin Marshall. Yeah, so finally got his name. But yeah, so it's interesting too. In Colorado State, if they win out, they can definitely find themselves in a nice bowl game, like in the LA Bowl against a Pac-12 team. Like, definitely not a bad life to live if you're Colorado State.
Yeah, what a year for Colorado State that they've had. And you're right, that's a good point that there was only 7 conference games that they've had. So or that any Mountain West team has had, which definitely makes it. I mean, we've seen the toll that maybe it's incentivizing playing fewer conference games down the line if there's an excuse to kind of change that rule because you're seeing what it's doing to the SEC. Just in the SEC, like everyone, like Georgia and all these teams are assuming, like, oh yeah, we can get in, like we're a good enough team, we can get in with 2 losses. And it's like, okay, like what happens when everyone has 2 losses? Like someone's gonna get left out, right? So. Absolutely.
Exactly. So, I mean, going on to my next game of the week, I mean, when we're talking about conferences that are too big, gonna go with the Coastal Athletic Conference, formerly the Colonial Athletic Conference. I mean, and the game this week is just amazing. You got 7-3 William and Mary versus 9-2 Richmond. You have the South's oldest rivalry. They've been playing since the 1800s. I mean, it's interesting because there's like 3 different South's oldest rivalry. You got UVA versus North Carolina. You got the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Auburn versus Georgia, and then you got William and Mary versus Richmond, which is the South's oldest rivalry, I guess, or one of those. I think they also call themselves the South's oldest rivalry. But Richmond right now is 9-2. They will probably get a seed in the FCS playoffs. William and Mary is 7-4. Excuse me, a win over Richmond could probably send them into the playoffs, boost their resume a good amount. And I mean, we talked about running backs at the FBS level this year being a great year for running backs. Talk about running backs for both William and Mary and Richmond. You got Bronson Yoder, who has 1,083 yards and 10 touchdowns, 5'11, 205. I mean, he's a senior. He could find himself in the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl. Kind of reminds me a bit. Um, Actually, I'm not going to say it because I'm going to get called out. But if I say he reminds me, he's not Dylan Lobby. He is not Dylan Lobby. Like, I'm not going to say he reminds me of Dylan Lobby. That's of New Hampshire. It's obvious. That's easy comparison for obvious reasons, and I'm not going to say it. He only has 10 catches on the year, so Bronson Yoder is not Dylan Lobby, but he still is a solid back who was efficient and who is durable at 5'11", 200 pounds, and I definitely think he deserves a shot in All-Star game. Zach Palmer Smith, on the other hand, 223. He has 1,197 yards and 10 touchdowns for Richmond this year. He is definitely Walter. Both guys are Walter Payton candidates in this game. And I think the biggest point is not just the playoff implications, but this might be the last time that this rivalry is played for a few years with Richmond going to the Patriot League. Richmond does not have William and Mary scheduled next year and or the year after that or the year after that. And we've heard this story before plenty of times. So hopefully these two can figure it out. They've been playing since I'm gonna get the year exactly they've been playing. I want to say it's like the 1890s they've been playing. Like um getting that really quick. My internet loads quickly. Since 1898 they've been playing. So the Capital Cup, definitely got to watch it. Well, fork out that credit card because it's on Flow Sports. But definitely a great rivalry and another one we've lost conference realignment.
Yeah, it's man, at some point, I think in the grand scheme of college football, we're gonna hopefully start playing these rivalry games again. Whether it's through conference realignment again, like Texas A&M and Texas, or the Holy War in Utah BYU. And we're gonna look back and be like, this was silly. That we did this whole experiment, like made a. Yeah, I truly believe and very genuinely hope that it's just like a cliff note. It's like, oh yeah, we took a break for these years because of this silliness. Or you could just be like uber petty, like Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and just play never ever ever getting back together right after you steal a win, right? So, but it's gonna make for some interesting little things. Yeah, it's. I know it's what you and I hate most about conference realignment is losing some of these traditional games. But anyways, moving on to my last game of the week. I'm actually going to go with a pair of games that are in the MVFC race. North Dakota State at South Dakota, and then South Dakota State at Missouri State. If you're not following the FCS as tightly as you are the FBS, it's really the equivalent weekend of like if Oregon played Penn State and Indiana played Ohio State in the Big Ten, where you have the top four teams in a premier conference facing off against each other. For South Dakota State versus Missouri State, SDSU has the third best total rushing offense in the country. They have the fifth best total defense. They've also allowed like the least number of sacks of anyone in the country, which speaks to their offensive line. They've only allowed like 22 sacks on the whole year. Next best in the FCS is 30. So eight sacks less than anyone else going against the team in Missouri State, where their quarterback, Jacob Clark, no one averages more yards per attempt than him in the FCS. So it's definitely going to be a very heavy South Dakota State running the ball versus Missouri State's pretty elite passing offense in that game. And then on the other side, or on the other portion of the conference, North Dakota State versus South Dakota, everyone's going to assume, I think, that the Bison are going to like pull out a win. Their only losses against Colorado in like week 1 or 2 of the year, right? No, South Dakota won in Fargo a year ago. So if they can repeat the magic at home, it's going to make things very spicy in the MVFC race. Now, South Dakota cannot win it themselves because of a loss previously this year, but a win against NDSU would almost ensure a top 8 seed and a bye week in the FCS playoffs. Correct me if I'm wrong on that FCS voter, Omar. But for South Dakota, man, two of the top 20 sack leaders in the FCS are both on South Dakota's defensive line. So if they can manage to get some TFLs, get some sacks, get NDSU's offense off schedule, it could actually lead to an interesting matchup.
I mean, yeah, the last couple of years, the Missouri Valley Football Conference races definitely had more parity, I'll say. Like it's not so much the old guard, Southern Illinois, Illinois State. And I mean old guard when I don't mean I guess old guard of middle of the pack teams getting the at-large bids alongside North Dakota State and South Dakota State. It's definitely the South Dakota, North Dakota, both getting in the mix, prove themselves to be legitimate. And the Missouri State has definitely been under the radar. The same thing with Delaware, because both teams are going to the FBS and they're not eligible to receive votes in the FCS top 25 because they're transitioning to FBS. But Missouri State's had an amazing year. They positioned themselves well to have a great first year. I won't say great, maybe a good first year like Jacksonville State did in Conference USA. So I mean, just huge games this week. And who would have thought that Missouri State would be the one to really be the final big obstacle for South Dakota State before going into the postseason, really. I mean, in South Dakota too. South Dakota's a program on the rise. They've looked amazing this year. Hopefully they make a playoff run unlike last year. North Dakota State shut them down in the dome on ABC. And so, I mean, just hopefully, they can make a playoff run and kind of, I guess, change the culture at South Dakota when it comes to the postseason and show that, hey, they are a national contender. So going with my last game of the week, I'm going to showcase this one because I will be attending it. We got SUNY Maritime versus Husan College in the in the Fusion Bowl. So Division 3, they have bowls for teams that don't show up, that don't play in the playoffs, and we have a great quarterback matchup. This one, Steven Stassi has 28 touchdowns and 5 interceptions for the State University of New York Maritime, and then for Husan, their quarterback um, his name's escaped me again. Their quarterback, Max Clark, has 19 touchdowns, or sorry, 24 touchdowns and 8 interceptions with 1,911 yards. I want to showcase their receiver, Nason Bertholet, who is 5'7", 175. He's got 528 receiving yards, 38 catches, and 7 touchdowns on those 38 catches. Every fifth catch is a touchdown. And Bertholet he's 5'7", 175. I can see him being an amazing fit in the indoor football league. And I'm not saying that from a talent perspective, but I mean, he reminds me of you know, kind of like a Cavante Turpin type of guy. Cavante Turpin got his start in fan-controlled football, just a slippery, elusive guy with blazing fast speed that could make a difference in those indoor football offenses because of the vertical motion. So definitely something to watch. I'll be there going to my first D3 bowl game, and of course, that's the appetizer before Army Notre Dame, because Throg's Neck is about a 15-minute drive from Yankee Stadium. So if you're in town for Army Notre Dame, definitely check out the Fusion Bowl in at SUNY Maritime at Throg's Neck.
Yeah, so much great football at all levels. And we talk about it every week, and I wish we could get to all of it every week, but yeah, just a lot of football to keep track of. That's the beauty about college football, man. You're never going to be able to keep track of everything at every level. Some conferences can't even keep track of who's going to their own conference championship. Big Ten, if it takes you 3 days to realize that someone clinched a berth into your own title game. So, anyways, but Omar, that's it for me. Anything else you want to add before we hop off?
No, I'm good. Definitely excited for this week, and it's crazy that we're at the penultimate week of the FBS season and the last week of the FBS season. FCS season. I mean, we got Harvard Yale too. Who could forget about Harvard Yale at noon on ESPNU? Harvard is having an amazing year. They got one loss, so hopefully they can cap off the year strong. But man, it's just crazy that we reached close to the end.
Yeah, no, it's crazy that we've only got 2 weeks left of the regular season in the FBS. And then obviously we have 3 weeks of playoff games before the national championship in the FBS. Just as a reminder, in the FCS, how many weeks do we have to feast on football before its conclusion in Frisco? Is it still in Frisco? Has it moved for
It
this year?
is. I want to say there was either other cities in the bidding for the FCS championship game, but I don't know if they gave away the bids. I know Tampa was in the conversation. Um, but I'll have to check on that for you. But yeah, Frisco as of this year is still the national championship site.
Got it. Perfect. Well, maybe we will see that change. So, Omar, appreciate you waking up as early as you did again this year. The sacrifices he makes so that you guys can get prepped for your college football weekend. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm glad I woke up this early, Jackson. And until next time, everyone, peace, love, and soul, the Burger Poppers.